Hi, I'm Matthew Lapp, host of Matthew Lapp Train Guy. Also today, I am at the Strasburg Railroad in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. The Strasburg Railroad is located on 301 Gap Road in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. The railroad is just north of the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, which is next door on the other side of Gap Road. It travels through Amish country. The railroad began in 1832. There is 8 miles of trackage, and people rode the line for many years. It originally operated as a horse-drawn railroad until 1851 when a 420 built by Norris and Long in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1836 was purchased, and it was the William Penn and was built for the Philadelphia and Columbia Railroad and was the first locomotive on the Strasburg Railroad. In 1865, it was sold and was possibly rebuilt when bought. The Strasburg Railroad began, like most other railroads in the country, as a connection between 2 points. Before the railroads began crossing the country, Strasburg, Pennsylvania was a bustling town and was a key stop on the Conestoga wagon route. As railroads gained popularity and wagon routes were no longer used, the town lost income and traffic and was bypassed by the Philadelphia and Columbia Railroad in 1831. It only missed the town by several miles. The railroad was easier and more cost-effective to build than a canal. The town of Strasburg petitioned the state government to build a short line and was chartered in 1832, and the Strasburg Railroad was born. It is the oldest working tourist railroad in the continent. The first steam locomotive to travel over the rails is believed to have been one of the first 50 steam locomotives to be built in the country. The railroad hauled passengers, mail, and freight to the main line where they could catch connections to the bigger cities of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and other points. Also, the railroad bought in the coal the operation needed. A steam mill was built in 1866. In 1901, Conestoga Traction Company streetcars reached the town. It offered a more direct route between Lancaster and Strasburg. Then, in 1918, the railroad and the mill was purchased by State Senator John Hampshire, and automobiles became more popular and passengers declined, and the railroad became a freight line primarily. Then in 1926, the Hampshire mill decided that steam was too expensive and purchased a gas-powered gas switcher built by Plymouth. Then the railroad continued to operate till 1957, hauling freight from Lemon Place to the mill and back. Then that year, the railroad became in terrible shape and it was threatened to be abandoned. Then the railroad was put up for sale. Damage was caused by Hurricane Hazel, and inspectors from the Interstate Commerce Commission's lack of approval for operation of the Plymouth locomotive. Then Henry K. Long and Donald E. L. Hallock, who were both rail fans from Lancaster, heard of the ad in the newspaper and made plans to buy the railroad. Then the railroad was soon getting ready for operation by cleaning and repairing rolling stock, cutting weeds and fixing track and everything else that needed to be done. They didn't hire out any of the work. They did it themselves and learning as they went along. Then shortly after, the railroad attracted tourists and the railroad began operating as a tourist railroad in 1959. Then in 1960, the railroad bought a steam locomotive to have it easier to pull the passenger trains because the Plymouth diesel wasn't enough to pull the train up the hill. People came to the railroad for the countryside, the link to the Amish, as a day trip for touring the country. Also, along the line, the railroad travels past a lot of Amish farms. First, the train goes by the Red Caboose Motel, which is just east of the property. Also, that is one of the places to watch the trains roll by as well. Then passes Cherry Crest Adventure Farm and then Groff's Picnic Grove, which is next to the siding where the two trains pass by each other if there are two trains scheduled to operate and let each other pass when they are coming in both directions. Then at Carpenter's Crossing, which is on Black Horse Road, the train makes a brief stop to have the locomotive blow the whistle, and we hear the echo and is known as the ghost whistles. The Lancaster, Oxford and Southern Railway was a 3-foot gauge railroad that was built in 1890. It ran between Lancaster and Oxford, Pennsylvania. The main line connected Oxford and Peach Bottom, Pennsylvania. The original line was built between 1872 and 1878 as the eastern division of the Peach Bottom Railway. The line began in Oxford, connecting with the Philadelphia and Baltimore Central Railroad, and proceeded roughly westward to Fairmont, then southwest to Peach Bottom on the eastern shore of the Susquehanna River. The line served passengers and freight from farm communities, but there were no industries on the line, and it was not successful financially. In 1881, the Peach Bottom Railway declared bankruptcy and was recognized as the Peach Bottom Railroad. In 1890, the company went bankrupt again and it was sold to investors who reorganized as the narrow gauge Lancaster, Oxford and Southern Railroad. These investors hoped to connect Lancaster County to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad by building a branch line from Fairmont on the existing Lancaster, Oxford and Southern line to Quarryville, Pennsylvania, as well as an extension from Oxford, Pennsylvania, southeast to Singer Lake, Maryland, on the Baltimore and Ohio main line. To this end, they plan to convert the existing tracks to narrow gauge. Then, in 1918, competition for freight traffic from trucks, as well as the high prices being offered for scrap metal during World War I, led the management to permanently discontinue operations, and the line entirely was torn up. As I mentioned, the train makes a brief stop before crossing Black Horse Road. The ghost whistle is because one steam engine was abandoned in the valley on the Lancaster, Oxford and Southern Railway, and it was Locomotive 6, built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1905, and the locomotive serial number was 26003, and it had a 440 wheel arrangement. The locomotive was left with no way to get back. The locomotive was then scrapped in 1919. This is why the ghost whistle's done on each train ride toward Lemon Place. Then the train continues to roll till it gets to Lemon Place Junction. On those very tracks that go past the Strasburg Railroad is the tracks that connects with the Strasburg Railroad, allowing freight cars to be switched off the main line to the yard nearby. It also allows locomotives owned by the Strasburg Railroad to bring freight cars to the yard to have goods delivered to nearby locations from the east end of the yard as well. And when they're done unloading the cars, they are brought back to Paradise, Pennsylvania, so they can be ready to go on their next destination. Also, the tracks that go by where the Strasburg Railroad connects is what used to be the Philadelphia and Columbia Railroad, which was started the same year as the Strasburg Railroad and traveled between Columbia and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and lasted till 1857 when it merged to the Pennsylvania Railroad. Also, when Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1861, his inaugurational train was started in Springfield, Illinois, and passed on those very tracks as he made his way into Washington, D.C. He was the 16th President of the United States of America. In 1865, he made his way into Washington, D.C. He was seeing a play at the Ford Theater and was soon unaware of something dangerous that was about to happen behind him. A man named John Wilkes Booth came up behind him with a pistol and shot him on the back of the head and killed him. Then John died 3 hours after Abraham Lincoln. Then Abraham Lincoln's funeral train started in Washington, D.C., and when it made its way up to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, it then traveled over those very tracks, taking him the other way to New York and back east toward Springfield, Illinois, where he is buried now. Also in 1915, the railroad was electrified and the overhead wires above the tracks are still where they are today. Then in 1968, the Pennsylvania Railroad and New York Central Railroads both merged to form the Penn Central Railroad. In 1976, the Penn Central then merged to Conrail. Also, Amtrak was established in 1971, and Amtrak took over most of the network's passenger service in the USA, and we mostly see Amtrak trains passing the site in Paradise as well. Sometimes trains come by while the tourist train is stopped at the site, while the locomotive is going up to the other end, or getting ready to stop the train and be ready for it. And Amtrak trains and the locomotive on the Strasburg Railroad likes to exchange horns and whistle sounds as well. This town is also known as Paradise, hence the railroad is nicknamed the Road to Paradise. The station and shops are headquartered in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, and like I said, it is located just across the street from the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, which houses a great collection of locomotives and freight and passenger cars and a lot of railroad history. Filming happened on the railroad before, such as Hello Dolly, Wild Wild West, the 2000 movie Thomas and the Magic Railroads. Some scenes were filmed along the railroad and even on the platform. Also, the second movie was filmed 22 years later called I Heard the Bells. The shops are where the locomotives and cars owned by the railroad are maintained. There are also times they work on other steam locomotives from other places as well for contracting work. Also at the station, there is a 15-inch gauge railroad that operates at the depot going from the shop building the train is housed in till the line meets up where the standard gauge railroad starts, crossing Gap Road. Today, the railroad continues to haul tourists on the line, and sometimes freight is hauled as well.